plug very fast for the Octopus GitHub. Thanks to them for sponsoring this event. And now let's go to the next one, which is Matthew Bolton. And yeah, there is a little bit of French here, which I used the exact same tagline last year, which means friends of my friends are my friends, so to say. And last year I used this tagline for Zeno, being a friend of Damien. And this year, it's funny how it all started with Matthew. Actually, I've known Matthew for days. So usually most of the people, I know them for years, but the way it went is that I was pondering what would be my last speaker on the line, and then Artwin came along, boom, came along, and told me, what about Chris? Where's Chris? Who's Chris? So at Chris Finn is a colleague of Matthew, and told me, well, I can't make it, but there's this other guy there who can make it. And so that's how I ended up asking Matthew to come speak here. The problem, though, is he's not a programmer. What? Wait, he's not a programmer? But I think as programmers, we can learn tons of stuff from non-programmers. He's a journalist working at Mac Format. And so let's see what he has to tell us. And please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Matthew Bolton.
I'm here to ask, are you making a 5-star app, as it says up here? Now, I've no doubt that you are all making something amazing, but the question is more about when you send it out to professional reviewers, will they give it full marks? And even more important than that, much more important, is will your users give it high reviews, full marks, in their user reviews? The reason is that's so important is now that the App Store has changed slightly, and the way rankings are done now includes ratings and reviews much more than it ever has before, which means that your user reviews aren't just kind of, you know, ego fluffing, or they don't just give information to the people who actively seek them out. They actually affect the visibility of your app, which means that good reviews, an average rating of 4.9 compared to 3.5 might mean the difference between you know, really big success for your app, or you ending up struggling as a developer, perhaps. So I'm not talking about, as I say, whether you're making a good app. You're all, you know, obviously very talented developers, very committed, coming to conferences and things like that. I've no doubt that you're all making something fantastic. But is there anything that is getting forgotten, or is there anything that you think that your app doesn't need, your users might disagree? What I want to talk about is examples of where fantastic apps have sometimes just fallen a little bit short. I've looked at hundreds of apps in the few years I've been working for Mac Format and for Tap magazine. And the examples I want to bring up here, you can think of them as kind of cautionary tales. They are almost universally very, very good apps, or excellent apps, or some of my favorites, but they all have little bits where they could be even better, and that, as I say, is more important than ever before these days. I'm not so much going to talk about kind of marketing or how to get your app to reviewers or anything like that. If you do want to talk to me about that, you can grab me at lunch or something like that. That's no problems. But yeah, it's about little things that can tarnish what should be perfect, or as near to perfect as things get, really great apps. So they can be big things, or they can be quite small, and they can happen in any part. They don't have to be a huge chunk of functionality missing that can be the problem. It can be much smaller than that. And it starts right at the beginning, even when you just first open the app. So this is Plants vs. Zombies 2. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize it. This screen asking for a rating came up as soon as I opened the app one time. I hadn't opened it for days, and I open the app, and the first thing I see is this thing telling me to rate it. There's only one tap to clear it, the little X in the top corner, but if I rate it now, at this point, what's that review particularly going to say? Is it just going to be, well, I've just been having lots of fun with the app? Well, no, I haven't. I haven't opened it in days. It's going to be something like fun, but bugged me for reviews. But I've just seen Skitch on the Mac App Store currently has a few one-star reviews in a row. You know, Skitch by Evernote, which is an annotation tool. Currently got quite a few one-star reviews in a row saying things like, well, you wanted a review, here it is. Really kind of bitter about being bugged for reviews at the wrong time, and which happens. Ratings are really important, which is kind of what I'm saying going through all this, but it's about choosing your moment. Plants vs. Zombies takes place in stages, 10-minute stages-ish. In between those would be the perfect time to ask when someone is, you know, maybe they'd be happy to take a break for a few minutes. Just assaulting someone at the, assaulting is a strong word, but bringing it up that way at the start is, like, it can color how the perception of your app from then on. Another bad moment to ask is something like this, a productivity app, in this case, someone's typing in, trying to make notes, and you stop them doing their work to ask for a rating. That's not going to give you a good rating. You're annoying someone into reviewing it. You're going to end up with not a great review, and that can, you know, then go on to potentially affect your visibility. What we're talking about is kind of classic door slams. We see them all on the web. If you accidentally click on a Forbes article or something, you probably have seen where it just comes up with a screen telling you to download its app. We all hate them there, and obviously people hate them in apps as well. This was Fairway Solitaire, which is another game I liked. In this case, instead of asking for ratings, we're asking for IAP. This was the first time I ever opened the app having downloaded it. So I don't even know what any of this stuff is talking about. I don't know if I would want to buy it. I don't know if 50% off is a particularly good deal, or sometimes it's more than 50% off. I don't know what the golf shop is. I don't know why I would want X-ray glasses. It doesn't mean anything to me. But again, it gives this perception that, it gives this lasting impression that when someone does leave a review, it could be, this is a fun game, but I don't like the way it asked me for stuff. That's possibly not going to be a very high scoring review. And obviously, as far as in-app purchases and trying to get people to buy things goes, of course, developers need to make money. No one's arguing anything against that. But making ads the very first thing you see could be a problem to what people eventually think of your app and whether they recommend it. And again, it's just about choosing your moment. Fairway Solitaire here has a tutorial when you first play it, and part of that tutorial is how you use the purchasing system, the golf shop. So that would be the time to suggest an in-app purchase, once I've actually learned how the game works at all. Another slightly different kind of door slam can be login screens. So Google Maps did this a lot when it was first released on iOS. It doesn't do it as much now, but I have still seen it do it once or twice. And so you would open the app, and before it even let you see the tiles, it's asking you to log into your Google account. And again, the logging into the Google account isn't a problem, but it's about choosing the moment. We've been using map apps for years, and we're used to tapping the icon and seeing instantly a map straight away. That's what people want from Maps app. That's what people expect from it. They don't expect any hurdles to jump through when they just want to basically open the app, see a map. When someone searches for something and the Google Maps app comes up with the results and you select one, that's a good time to ask someone to log in, because you can give them a reason for logging in. You can say, well, if you log into your Google account, you can save this search to access from multiple devices. Brilliant, useful, obvious, and doesn't get in the way. I mean, it's different for something like Draw Something, as I've highlighted here, because I know it's a multiplayer game when I download it. So I have an expectation that one way or another, I must need to connect with my friends or it's not going to work. So having a Facebook login there is more reasonable. But with something like Google Maps, I've already used Maps app. I know it's not necessary for me to log in. I know others do it more simply. So it ends up feeling just like another hurdle, another thing that's maybe going to make me not feel as well disposed towards the app if I do come to review it. And while we're talking about things that bug people, just going to throw in the shameless notifications that some apps do. This one in particular didn't even really make sense. I had finished the game when this notification came through to me. So my fight wasn't outstanding. I mean, it was outstanding, but like, I finished, I was done. It's just kind of, it ended up annoying me into deleting the game to get these notifications, which is a shame. It means I'm not going to play it again. I'm never going to throw any in-app purchases the way of the developer, which is presumably what the aim of this tweet was, going by there, claiming my bonus credits bit at the end. But it's, you know, it kind of makes me think about what, we don't expect anything else to come at us this way. If you imagine if your television set-top box sometimes just turned your TV on for you and suggested that you started watching something, we'd go crazy. But apps that do it kind of, well, drive me as crazy as that. And a lot of other people. How do I know it drives people crazy? Because these are the apps that I've worked on, the app editions of them, of my magazines, and there was a time, it's not happening as much these days, when we were sending out a variety of kind of duplicate notifications. So if you had more than one of our apps, you'd receive it more than once. They were coming out quite often. Here, you're looking at notifications sent at 1:30 in the morning to get people to buy things. And it got us negative mentions in particular. Our first ever mention by Marco Arment, which could have been very helpful. It turned out to be him saying he was deleting the app because it was bugging him. That's not what you want. And the lesson from this is that our notifications weren't controlled by us. They were actually controlled by a central team who weren't as bothered about our reputation among the community. So there's a lesson for you. Different kind of door slam, still along the similar topic, is really dense introductions that can feel really difficult for users. I've used clear here, but it certainly isn't the only offender, and it's not the worst by a long way. Once you get past this first screen, Clear has an excellent way of introducing you to how its gestures work as a gesture-based to-do list. But this screen in particular, I'm looking at a hierarchy, a UI hierarchy that I've never seen before. At this point, I haven't used the app. I'm 2 screens into an introduction, and I'm looking at levels of a hierarchy that I've never touched. I have no context for this information. So this is really difficult to understand ultimately. In a paid app, like Clear is, people who've already bought it will persist past a difficult introduction. That's not a problem. You don't need to necessarily worry about people abandoning your app because your introduction is confusing. But it's about what comes next. It's about when they then, even if they come to very much like your app, and you know they probably will, they will learn all of its nuances eventually. But when they leave a review, if that review says that it was hard to learn or that it was confusing, then that could cost you future sales, or that could affect, for a start, something that says that something's hard to learn might well, you know, not be the highest possible scoring review, but it might also put people off in the future. So an introduction may not just be, or a good tutorial introduction may not just be about the risk of losing someone from your app. It could be the risk of pushing people away later, depending on their opinion. If you're going to make changes to standard iOS interface elements, then you've got to be really, really careful. Otherwise, again, it can be just a tiny thing that makes people feel like your app isn't as good as it could have been, marking you down for it. This is Camera Plus for iPad. And the thing here is, normally in iOS, and it's been this way for years, if you've got something like a camera app, and Camera Plus, when you're looking at all your photos, you view them in film strips, in thumbnails, you tap on one and it comes up big. If you tap on the wrong one, okay, you want to go back without doing any changes, you tap the back button. Whereas the back button normally in iOS, it's in the top left corner. So maybe you're fairly new to Camera Plus, maybe you just haven't used it in a while, you tap on the wrong image, it comes up, you reach to the top left to tap, and you hit the delete button instead, in this case. It does come up with a modal dialog to ask if you're sure about deleting, but not everyone reads modal dialogues, so that may still end in disaster. And the thing, Camera Plus is an excellent camera organization app. It's fantastic, but even if, and people will learn to avoid the top left corner. It's actually the button in the top right corner that is the back button in this case, the one with the film strips. People will learn, they'll learn the way in if they really like your app, but if they end up leaving a review that says something like this, and you're a semi-professional camera app, that's really going to harm you in the long term. This would be a phrase to avoid in reviews, and it's as simple as I probably wouldn't put the delete button where the back button normally goes. All right, so some really big stuff here about missing key features. It's not always easy or possible to avoid for various reasons, but especially if you're aiming at enthusiasts. If you're looking at photo editing software or video editing or digital artistry or all that kind of stuff, you're going to be up against some big players if you're starting from a standing start yourself. And these big players will have established features. So even if you've come up with something brilliant and new that's very different, if you don't match what people are expecting from similar kinds of apps, you won't necessarily get a wholly positive response. Or at the very least, even if people appreciate what you're doing, they might not consider it comprehensive enough to be worth a high score. This is Mixtures, which is a photo editing app that produces really nice results. It lets you effectively create your own filters using different effects and blend modes. It's really good fun to play around with, and it can produce stuff that's lovely. But what got me when I was using it was, with no basic image editing controls that you can apply at any point at all, sometimes you actually end up being quite limited in what you can do. Basically, the way some of the filters combine, they can actually affect the visibility of the photos. They can make it come out too dark, or they could end up making it a little less saturated than you'd like, even though the effect is actually what you're after. So if it just had a brightness control, you could fix that in the end. Fine, no problem, but it has nothing. You're just kind of, the effects combine, and then there's no extra tweaking ability. And it wouldn't be a hard fix. It's just a small thing to add, but it's so focused on that one feature that these extra tools are missing. This is CuteCut, which is a video editor, and it's excellent. It's added a lot of the features that I'm going to talk about now, so it's more of a previous problem than a current one. It's probably now the best video editor on iOS, but it started out as offering some great higher-end features than something like iMovie offered, but missing some really important stuff. As I say, splitting clips, it had, I think it still has really kind of dodgy import options. It's just much harder to do an efficient selection like you can in iMovie, and no consistent snapping on the timeline, so it's a bit of a clumsy thing to use for experienced editors who will be used to that. But the main one was this splitting clips thing, because in video editing, being able to split clips on a timeline is a great cheat for making other features become more flexible. CuteCut offers much better titles and transitions for video than iMovie on iOS does. Well, and even really iMovie on Mac. But they're actually quite basic in how they're applied. What they do is good, but how they sit with your existing video was quite basic. Splitting clips allows you to get around the fact they're basic. It means that you can cheat and edit it. You can make it more advanced. But by not including this one feature, CuteCut basically left all of its good stuff unable to be used as well as it would have. Which means that it just, ultimately, it wasn't as good as it wanted to be. It wasn't as powerful as it maybe thought it was even. They've since fixed that, and CuteCut is excellent now, and I thoroughly recommend it. Sometimes an interface can be as good as a feature, and I'm particularly talking about interaction rather than design, although we'll talk about design in a bit. For some apps, particularly apps that have a simple outcome that's set, like sending email or reminders, which is what I'm going to focus on. There's only one particular kind of outcome, so ease of use can be much more important than actually any functionality. This is due. Super fast reminders is its exact name, and it fairly lives up to its name. The image on the left shows you like what your reminders list looks like, and in particular, it's got all these shortcuts just under each reminder. Things like being able to set a reminder to repeat, or to delay it by a couple of minutes or an hour, or to turn its alarm on and off, and things like that. And on the right, you've got this. You've got a screen of when you first bring up a new reminder. The cursor is already in the text box, it's ready to type, and then below it, you've got these 4 time shortcuts just above the keyboard that were set by me. I choose those, and so I set them for regular times, like lunchtime. I run a lot of errands on my lunch hour, so I have an alarm set for 1 o'clock. I can write a reminder in just a couple of seconds, much easier than Apple's own app, much easier than a lot of Due's competition. Due actually does very little that any other reminder app doesn't. The point is that its key features are its shortcuts. Reminders have a set outcome. An alarm goes off, they remind you to do something. Whichever app does that fastest, does that simplest, does that easiest, is arguably the best app and the one worthy of the highest review. It can really be a case of that Due can show up. Due is so easy to use that it can show up other reminders apps, even if they have more features, even if they're prettier, even if they do other stuff better. If it takes longer to set up reminders, they can ultimately feel not as good as something that is, in theory, more basic. However, I would say that Due isn't perfect, or isn't a 5-star app, if you like. It lacks location reminders, which these days a lot of people will expect, especially with Apple providing them. That was kind of about the way that something like Due can show up competitors by being just easier to use. But it's not just competitors that can actually prove to be your downfall as far as feature comparisons. For web services in particular, something elaborate, something like Evernote, let's say, if they're used to using the web version, people have an expectation of the features the app version should offer. And if you end up making your app version more basic, and when you don't include some feature that you may not realize lots of people will want to use, but they do, then your app version is going to end up getting lower reviews, and that's going to potentially reflect actually on the web version, since a lot of web services are now discovered through apps. Google Maps is the example I'm going to use for this one again. When the Google Maps app launched, it was without 3D maps or any offline caching option. Fine, the problem was the Android version had them. So we knew there were already app versions that could do these. We've seen them, we've used them many times in some cases. So, you know, we kind of, well, Google's going to make its own Maps app. Brilliant, that'll be excellent. Oh, why doesn't it have these basic features that we know other versions have? It acted as its own competitor showing it up. And it meant that, you know, when we did the professional review of it, we felt like we couldn't give it full marks, even though it was an excellent app, because we knew about these 2 really big features that should have been in there already, arguably, and would be added imminently. You can't call it a 5-star app if you know there's something better that's about to be added, should be added. And equally, it's the kind of thing that can get you backlash from users and turn into bad reviews that in a really competitive environment, which Maps is. I mean, Google is obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room and is never going to have visibility problems from that sense, but it's a competitive market. Miss out something basic, get lower reviews, your visibility goes down. One of the things as far as missing features goes is the perception of whether features should be in there or not. And that depends on who your app is for, because you don't have to include every feature under the sun to be considered feature complete. If you're aiming at a particular type of user, then you only need to include the features that they have. You can still get 5 stars while missing out a whole load of features. So, for example, I mean, I'm sure most of the people in this room probably use Tweetbot or something like that. I say something like that, I mean anything that isn't the generic Twitter app, to be honest. But if you're going for the Tweetbot users, what a lot of people want is that kind of granularity of control. All the options, the notification options, the customizable gestures, the huge amount of options as far as replying to people, things like that. That's what they would expect from Tweetbot. So if you were to launch a new Twitter app and you'd say, great for Tweetbot users, that's the suggestion you're putting in people's heads. If you say it's great for TweetDeck users, well, TweetDeck was popular for the multi-account support, for the letting you see loads of information from multiple accounts at once. That's what people are going to expect. So if you say, that your new Twitter app is in the vein of TweetDeck, you better offer fantastic multi-account support. You could skip some of the granularity of control of the Tweetbot type app, and people won't mind because that's not what you've projected that you're giving them. And then equally, if you're just going for basic Twitter users, you may not need multi-account support, you may not need the elaborate control, you may just be fine offering something that is nicely designed and doesn't have a blue line that runs through it for some reason. And then sometimes you'll have features that you've put in, but you find apps that lock down features or that don't work in quite the way people are expecting, and you kind of get responses like I've got here. It's, people say, well, this is good, but I don't understand why I can't do something. Quite often, this will come from making a decision about how you think your users will use your app. And there's always something to be said for standing up for that vision of how you think they should use it, but it's an assumption. And then, you've always got to ask yourself repeatedly whether your assumptions are correct. This is Layers, which is an app that lets you very quickly and easily create a mask to separate a photo into 2 photo layers, and then you can apply different effects to each one. Works really nicely. It's a bit scrappy compared to Photoshop, but that's fine because the point is that it's easy to use. But import your photo and it crops it to a square. Happens immediately, you're given no choice over it. I personally don't really use Instagram. I have an account because pretty much everyone does these days, but I don't really use it. If I've taken a wider screen photo and I've been very careful to compose it and it's all rule of thirds and things like that, then I don't necessarily want it cropped into a square, but that's what I'm stuck with. This was obviously an intentional choice. It's not like there's something in the operating system that forces photos to become square. So it was added by the Layers developers, and a lot of people aren't going to like it. This is Touchcast. It's quite new, that lets you do live video streams with what they call kind of web-type features. So you can have things like interactive quizzes and polls and clickable web pages and things like that in your video. Great for education stuff in particular. But the problem is that it's got a bunch of features, but it kind of can't decide exactly what direction it wants you to go into as far as how you make your videos. It's absolutely piling on with features, sometimes too many. But it's got all these live data features like live Twitter feeds and Google News tickers and things like that. But you actually can't stream video live from the app. You can't record and be immediately streaming with these things on top, which makes the live features seem kind of not that useful. The point of a live Twitter feed would be so that someone could tweet at you and you can respond during the show or something like that. That makes sense. But you can't really do that. It really kind of loses a lot of the point. It has some of the features, but there's one bit that's been left out that makes it inflexible. And then oddly, the flip side is similar. So, okay, you can't stream live, so everything should be done offline, but you can't record any imported video. You have to record everything live with the iPad's camera, which is not the best camera in the world, and then apply all of these features like polls and the web pages and stuff to it live as you're going, kind of in a kind of video, live video director role, but it isn't live. Again, just miss one feature out and it becomes so much less flexible. Ultimately, it feels flexible because it's half-formed. Lots of great features, but without you being able to produce the end result, It's not as good as it could be, quite simply. It's not just, so that's kind of missing features covered a little bit for now. But it's not just what's inside that counts. You don't want, reviews that say, well, this is good, but it's ugly. It's certainly not the end of the world. It's better than bad but pretty, I would argue. But you might think that features will be enough to avoid people thinking that an app isn't pretty enough or something like that. And sometimes it will be, but the best case scenario there is if your app is very basic looking but has great features, and another app comes along that has the same features and is much prettier and more pleasant to use, then you're probably going to miss out. The best case scenario with not worrying about your app's looks is that it doesn't make things any worse. Whereas if you make a pretty app, you can actually boost your ratings, boost people's opinions of you. So aesthetics of your app are important. And as I say, people will often choose the prettier of two options simply because they like nice things. It looks like more care is being taken of it, even if all the care has in fact gone into the functionality and the features. You can definitely get away with being utilitarian at times. On the left here we have SoundNote, which is, it's just bog standard iOS interface elements. What this lets you do is store recordings as notes and take some text to go along with the notes. It's fine, it's got a record button. All the information I need is easily visible. Nothing fancy, looks fine. The one on the right is a browsing app for a wireless hard drive. It's mostly non-standard iOS elements. It's pretty sparse looking, but again, no information is hidden. All it needs me to do is see what files are where, tap on them to open them, fine, it works. It's not pretty, but there's all the information I need is here. But you can't be utilitarian and then have usability suffer. That's too far. These are both apps for home automation systems, the Belkin Wemo on the left and the Lightwave RF system on the right. The Belkin Wemo uses pretty standard looking iOS elements, but it makes things much more simply and easily tappable than the Lightwave RF system. In one of the tabs on the Belkin system, you've got simple on-off button that's instantly accessible, and then more granular options available behind it if you need. Think about the way some of the settings work in the iOS settings app. But Lightwave RF on the right, it's a much more complex home automation system, but that complexity hasn't scaled up well in the app at all. It's nests of options. There's no instant turn your lights on off option. Instead, you have to tap to the room, then tap to the particular light, and then you're given percentages, including 0 and 100 for just basic one-off. Like, I just want to switch. Sometimes I want to put it dim and put it at 50% or whatever, but most of the time I just want to turn the light on and off. And it doesn't use things like the tabs at the bottom cleverly. The obvious thing would be to put my most common rooms in the tabs at the bottom, but instead I've got one tab that takes me to a whole list of rooms and one tab that takes me to a place where I can set up new complex sequences of automation. And the thing is, being pretty, being presented well, that can be a key selling feature for some apps, particularly data-based ones, fitness apps, and in this case, a weather station app. This app goes with the Netatmo Urban Weather Station, which is a little cylinder. You put one in your home, one outside, and they talk to the iPad. And here, the pictograms used and the way the live data is presented and the instant options for tracking it over time you're given, it's by far the best weather app I've seen. It possibly isn't the most comprehensive weather app you could find that's connected to a weather station, but that's not the point. The point is that it's human usable. The point is that if you were shown this and something that just kind of applied much more basic table structures and just very bland numbers and descriptions of things, then this is more appealing. This could be, if you've got two apps that present the same data, one is hard to read and not pretty, and one of them is like this and instantly viewable at a glance, this is the 5-star one. This is the better option. We've already touched on perception a bit, but expanding on that a little is, you've always got to remember that some things are subjective. Fine, you can't control everything that a user will think about your app. Sometimes they just don't like stuff. And you can't predict what they come into it expecting, even if you try to make sure that you're serving TweetDeck users. You can't always be sure that they're the ones who'll pick up your app. But you can try to avoid disappointment. You can manage expectations. In particular, make sure that you're delivering what the App Store description says that you're going to deliver. Or if you're sending out marketing emails to journalists or review sites, then make sure that you give a realistic view of your app. It's tempting to think that you have to really, really oversell to get people to take notice, but that's just risky. I actually did receive an email from a game company not long ago saying it was guaranteed to be as big as Angry Birds. What does that say to me about your app? It says a lot about the quality, about the addictiveness, about the longevity, about the variety. The game couldn't ultimately live up to the suggestion that saying it's like Angry Birds puts in my mind. Rovio is a massive company with a lot of talented developers and a huge amount of time and experience working on that kind of app. And it was a very similar app to Angry Birds as well. This kind of 1 or 2 person team, what they'd made just suffered from the comparison. Much better to, there's nothing wrong with comparing yourself with certain things, but don't do it in such a way that's, don't write checks that your app can't cash. That's the saying, doesn't quite go. And it's partly about just not letting people down with what you've promised in the description. It doesn't have to be hyperbole that sells you short. You could write the most boring sentence of a promise of a future in the world and it not turn out to be accurate and not turn out to be useful. There was a Twitter app that I looked at a while ago. The point was that it had a diary, it produced a diary for you from your tweets, but it didn't store your tweets properly. So it was just a slightly not great Twitter app. There's a radio app that I've tried with an alarm function that doesn't go off every day reliably. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But if your thing says includes alarm function and someone comes to rely on that to wake them up, it'd probably better go off at the right time or that person is going to leave a really bad review if they lose their job. Oh, well, this one's fallen off the bottom of the slide. A music app that claimed to include an advanced equalizer. And I looked at that and thought, well, great, that sounds lovely. Better than just the simple built-in options of rock and jazz or whatever. That was actually what it offered. It just offered the built-in options of rock and jazz or whatever. Like, you don't need to oversell. Sell the app you've actually made. The assumption, I'm assuming you are all actually making really, really great apps. So sell that. Don't be tempted to try to sell some app that you feel like your app should be or something else. It's just, it's partly it's about confidence and partly it's just about knowing what the single great thing you've done is, even if it's one single thing or the many great things you've done is, and just focusing and sell them properly. And if they're good, people will respond to them. The point is that if you oversell, you can end up leaving people with a negative impression without doing anything wrong because people were expecting something they don't receive. So they mark based on, or they give you a user review based on what they were expecting. As I say, you can't always control it, but there's definitely a role to play in managing those expectations. Yes, promising the world in the App Store description might get you one sale, but the bad reviews that come from it, bad word of mouth, might mean that it's only a very short-term success at best. So a quick kind of, summary of the top-level stuff that I've been talking about. Don't do something that will annoy people and leave a bad impression and then ask them for reviews. That's not going to go well. but some apps do it. Make sure you're matching your competitors for the key basic features. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Hertzberg's two-factor theory, which suggests that you have hygiene factors, which are basic things that you cannot be without for success, and then more positive factors that will increase people's opinion. The point is that don't forget what you might call hygiene features, which are features that people won't celebrate when they're included, but will berate you for if they're missed. And don't forget to include some basic tools, even if you're a single use, a single selling point app. Even if your USP is your thing, don't coast on that. Don't forget to include some other simple tools. Make sure you give some headroom for people to grow in your app. Don't lock off options if you don't need to. Fine to keep it simple for beginners, but make sure there's room for people to grow. Have a usable interface, by which I mean make sure that nothing is being hidden. Make sure that all the options will be discovered or found or touched upon by users at some point. And manage expectations. Sell the great app you've made. Don't sell some other great app you haven't. A lot of these things may seem really, really obvious to you. These things happen though, and all of the examples I've shown you, at some point, they weren't obviously problems to someone. Someone either may have decided they weren't problems, or they may have just been missed. There's no rule book. I mean, there's human interface guidelines, but that doesn't really count. But as with anything creative, the people who are making it get very, very close to it. It doesn't matter if it's a novel or a painting or an app. Any creative pursuit, people get very, very close, and it's so difficult to sometimes see the bigger picture, to see where things maybe are going wrong, if they're going wrong, or even just where it could be better, little things that could improve. And I'm not saying that if you've made any of the same decisions as the examples we've seen, that you're necessarily doing it wrong, but I'm just saying it's always worth taking a second look, a third look, always worth one more look until you release. How can you be sure you're not forgetting any of these kinds of things? You can't really, is the honest answer, but if you take a look at your competitors, obviously you will all be doing that, I'm sure, but take another look and look really carefully. Don't just look at the stuff that you're beating them at. Maybe you looked at your competitor and gone, right, I can do a better version of that. Make sure you also look at the stuff where they're beating you. Don't succumb to survivorship bias, where it's tempting to only look at the successful side as a point of the future. Failure or the less successful points can often be a more prudent indicator of where changes need to be made. Make sure you're looking at tangential apps as well. If you are making a web analytics app, look at fitness apps for the way they interpret data. See if there's anything there to do with gamification or human readability that's worth picking up on. If you're a photo editing app, take a look at digital artistry apps for the way they use their tools slightly differently. As far as like interfaces and things like that go, have you necessarily borrowed some of the best outside stuff? I'm not saying you should rip off someone else's interface. No one wants to do that, and no one wants to see their own interface ripped off. But I'm talking about small things that become part of the collective design language, like pull to refresh. There's so many apps include it now, but it was invented at one point. Tweety was a while ago now, but the point was certain elements are so good and so obvious that you kind of have to be a little bit shameless about including them in your own app. Make sure that you give the app to someone who's never ever used it before. Don't tell them anything about it. Don't give it to a colleague or to a friend who you've been telling the app about for months. Try to give it to someone who's never touched it and see how they get on with it. Maybe you can tell them roughly what kind of app it is, but the point is the only way to really see it through someone else's eyes is to see where someone struggles with it. One other thing is, for a lot of apps, some features will rely on a third party. If you're reliant on a service that you aren't in control of for one of your core features, how much do you trust them? Because if that goes down or if that changes, that can end up reflecting badly on your app. You're the one who might end up with the bad reviews. So you may be creating a fantastic app and seen what I've put up and have come to a conclusion that ultimately either going by what I've said, it's not possible to make a 5-star app, or just decide not to in the time frame you have or something like that. Happy anyway. Despite what I've been banging on about for 43 minutes, that's actually, like, there's lots of reasons to accept that, to accept that maybe your app won't get 5-star reviews, that it'll get 4-star reviews. For a start, ambition. Let's say you're working on an iPad version of a desktop app. So you're expecting people to come from the desktop app and to use that as well. I mean, a classic thing for this is something like video editors. You can never hope to feature match years and years of development, especially if you're going to have to rethink the UI while you're at it. So you may just have to accept that, okay, I'm not going to get 5-star reviews from users maybe, but your app could still be the highest reviewed. You'll still get the visibility by being the best of its kind, the best of its class. And of course, you may get featured by Apple if you're doing something with a huge amount of ambition that's not been done before. There's also just, maybe it's time to get the app out the door. Maybe you know that you could add more features, but there are lots of reasons why you might want to release earlier than that. You may need money from an early release. You may want to beat a competitor to market. You may want to release it with some analytics in to see how people are using it before you think about your next stage of development. Loads of reasons why you may decide to release before what you may personally consider feature complete. But you may just think I'm wrong, which is fine. That's cool. You all know much more about coding than I do, absolutely. You all know much more about your apps than I do, absolutely. I'm certainly not claiming to know better. I just want to present you with examples, present you with times when these excellent apps that could be even better, stuff does get forgotten, stuff does get missed, wrong decisions do get made, it does happen, but you know, you're all committed, you all deserve to do fantastically, and user reviews are now a big thing about visibility and success. It's true, I don't know your app. But just to prove that I do at least know mine, the app edition of Mac format, these are the four things we get lower reviews based on. You know, these are the comments that are in those lower reviews. The top one, that it's hard to cancel a subscription, is not something we can't do anything about. It's true, but we're on Newsstand. Newstand subscription is entirely out of our control. Certainly it's a valid complaint. I can't say anything about it. We just have to live with it. That it's sometimes a day late compared to the print version. Basically, we have a small team and it takes a lot of time and it's difficult to make. Again, completely valid criticism, can't say anything about it. We're working hard to try to make sure it doesn't happen. That there's a lack of customer support when there are problems. This is a real shame, and it's something I would love to have more direct control to fix. Basically, we have a central department for support at my publisher for all of our magazine apps, including Mac format and dozens of others. Sometimes, apparently, people don't get great response from them. All we can ever do is say to someone who's angry about it to contact us on the team directly, and we'll try to look into it. We do what we can. I wish that wasn't something we were getting bad reviews about, but there you go. Now, the last one is the really big one, which is speed of download. Even though our issues are usually only about 200 megabytes or so, they can take hours to download. But that is something we're working on. That is the one that's most easily fixable for us. And since that's the one that most people talk about, we'll be glad to get that fixed, and hopefully that'll bring our review averages up. But we do receive 5-star reviews. We've received plenty of them on Mac formats, and hopefully receive more once we fix these issues. And I hope very much that all of you will receive glowing reviews for all of your apps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthew. If there is one quick question, I will take it. Otherwise, we are probably all hungry. So let's go eat. Again, thank you, Matthew.